So when you show up to a group, how is your energy? How are you doing? So when you run a group, people pick up your energy. I especially pick up energy. I'm an empath. So I go into any group my whole life since I was a kid, and I pick up the energy immediately. So, but anyone, even if whether or not you're a highly sensitive person, you pick up the facilitator's energy. So the first thing you have to start with is your mindset. You're getting into the right state, getting into your heart before you come and ever walk in front of a group of people. Get yourself right. Maybe do a meditation, do whatever you have to do to get you in that state, then show up for that group. Because when I'm in front of a group, especially in addiction recovery, it's life and death. There's some of those people that I will never see again. I can tell you, I've facilitated a lot of workshops, and a lot of those people are no longer here. So I can tell you that it might be the last conversation I ever have with them. So I make sure it counts. But the way I actually navigate that is not this super high energy. It's a centered, grounded energy that I bring as a facilitator. And then I ask life-giving questions. And when you break people into pairs, you're creating psychological safety, even for that introvert, even for that quieter voice. Every voice gets heard. And then we bring them back. So it's the way you choreograph the conversations, the activities, which make it safe for someone to share that they normally wouldn't share. And I actually put that in my book because someone actually came through. I went to a 28-day treatment center. It's now a 90-day, which is great. But I went into a treatment center, and it's obviously highly confidential, HIPAA laws, like you don't get to share out of there, but I can share this story because you'll hear why. I went in, they paid me to come in and run my facilitation, my recovery facilitation. And I did it for over a year. Well, this gentleman was in my groups. He ended up being in 2 of my groups and his stay there. And I saw him 90 days later at a sober living residence. And I was like, oh my God, I was actually facilitating. He goes, yeah, I remember your workshops. I still practice some of the things you taught as an entrepreneur in recovery. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I did a third workshop with him in a sober living home. Today, he's 2 years in recovery. He's going to school to become an expressive therapist. So I share that because it matters. Like what we do for our own lives and our own selves as people in recovery matters, because then we get to show up for others. And I'm really blessed to have the facilitation training to be able to create these conversations worth having. Now, you don't get to every single time have everyone have the most amazing experience. No, that's not what it's about. It's just you just show up as your best self. You choreograph that the best you can. And then you'll have these people sharing things they've never shared. And that's the one thing he said. He's like, I was in that treatment center. He stayed in there for a little bit longer than the normal stay. And he said, I've never shared the way I shared in your groups because I felt safe to share. And so that's the key as a recovery facilitator, is building that safety. So
you mentioned that some of the folks you may never see again. And I imagine that's pretty stressful and hurts the heart and hurts the mind, especially if you're an empath. How do you manage that personally?
Well, I'm someone who self-care is a necessity. It's not a luxury. It's not something, I guess I'll practice this today. I had to do self-care. When I first found recovery at 22, I was facing a 7-year prison sentence. I was facing living with my mom, and the stress of this impending case, the panic disorder, the car being repossessed, the debt, all of the tornado that I roared through everyone's lives in addiction, now being in early recovery, and having to really take self-care serious. Self-care is sacred. So I treated it that way, and I still do that today without exception. So if there's any message I can give to anyone, it's self-care is honoring your creator. It is honoring yourself. It is what is going to help you when those adversities come, when you lose a friend to addiction, when you lose a family member, when these things are guaranteed to happen. In 15 years, I've lost people who have helped me in so many ways to addiction. And what keeps me going is that those people would have wanted me to keep going. They told me this when they were alive. So I'm just honoring each of those lives by living my purpose. So that's what keeps me going, is the self-care, sharing it with close people that are very close and I feel safe to share with, and then living with purpose and knowing that they would want me to continue this mission. And so that's what keeps me going.
Love that. I have to, I guess I'm supposed to have a nice flow to this interviewing stuff, but my questions just show up how they show up. So bear with me. You talked about being open about your recovery. And this is a sticking point that I feel pretty passionately about. But can you share how you feel about the transparency and what value it brings? I'm guessing you must think there's value to being open about it since you are open about it.
Yeah. We are in a state right now in our world that we have never seen before. And, I wasn't always open about my recovery. So I totally understand why people would not be, because the world doesn't reward you for that. In fact, you get threatened sometimes by sharing your recovery, which is complete insanity. So the big thing is people don't know that they can ask for help. And so if I'm someone who's sharing my story authentically with the world, I'm able to help that person that is suicidal, that is struggling with addiction. How else would they receive that message? Is it on the news? No. Is it in the newspaper? No. Is it on social media? Not if you don't follow people in recovery. So where do they get information that this is even possible, that hope is possible, that recovery is possible? We are the living versions of the people that have come before us to show that recovery is possible. And everyone's version of recovery is different. So by sharing your story and realizing how valuable your story is to people, I had to learn this. I learned this from a coach. He said to me, you not sharing your story is causing more suffering in the world. And he was exactly right. Because me keeping the story to myself, there could be someone right now who listens to this podcast, one person, and they hear something and something shifts. They have a paradigm shift just by this conversation. So that to me is what we can do as people in recovery, is we can help people share the message, whether it's at your work or not, because you're going to have managers, you're going to have parents reach out to you and they're going to say, my kid's dying. This is going on. I don't know what to do. And you can just say, hey, I'll just share my experience. And that can make all the world of a difference. So being transparent to me in 2021, we need to throw out old paradigms. Old paradigms need to go away. We need to now, and I'm not saying here to just be at a meeting and be, hey, and I'm this, and go outside the rooftops. That's not what I'm saying. Right. What I'm saying is keep that in the meetings and keep your story to the world. Your story's not copyrighted to meetings. Your story is your story. So share that story, share it with your friends, write a blog, put it out there. I can tell you, I've only written like 2 or 3 blogs ever. And those blogs have reached a few people and impacted them in major ways. And all I did was take like 30 minutes to write. And I know people who write way better than me. My friends are incredible writers, but they don't have a blog and they don't have books. I'm that person that's showing what's possible. And that's what you're doing with the show. We're helping people to hear a message of recovery that's going to resonate for them. I won't resonate with everyone, but you might talk to someone I can't. So that's the whole transparency thing. It needs to go away.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful when someone reaches out, that feeling, like even just saying it gets me like knowing those one people that actually have an opportunity to change or look at things different or whatever. There is something beautiful about that. And I know it warms my heart. So I know it must warm yours as well. Not that that's what the driving force is, but you definitely, you're a very eloquent speaker, Jesse. I have to tell you that, by the way. you share your message very well. Thank you for that.
Well, I have had a lot of practice. So thank you. Thank you. I've had, I've been in recovery a long time. And one of the things you do is you share your story. And, I've said it so many times. And now I just writing a book about your story makes you really think about what you're about to write on that paper, because you want to make sure you're sharing your message authentically and you're sharing it in a way that's going to be helpful. And so, yeah, so I'm a little more clear than ever on my story just because I just wrote, a book in 2020 that's coming out soon.
That's awesome. So do you see your focus is on entrepreneurs? Do you see, so you're coming from corporate America as well, and now you're in this entrepreneurial space, and I want to talk about coaching too. I got to remember to ask you about that, but do you see entrepreneurs falling into addiction because of the stress of being an entrepreneur, say, or like, what does the landscape of that look like? Are their problems different? I guess because we're on a show that's addressing both audiences, but what have you learned maybe that's special about entrepreneurs, or I don't know, what are your thoughts about entrepreneur specific?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason I called my business Entrepreneurs in Recovery is because I wasn't an entrepreneur, but I was so fascinated by entrepreneurs. No one in my family's an entrepreneur. So I was so fascinated. And so I started to reach out to entrepreneurs in recovery. If you want to be a recovery coach, reach out to recovery coaches. If you want to be a Major League Baseball player, learn from you know what I mean? So I was like, let me learn from entrepreneurs in recovery. And I started to reach out and I started to have conversations. And so what I find with people in recovery is that they can be very rebellious. They can be very entrepreneurial. They can be very like, I'm going to do this myself. And so that's a trait that's actually very valuable when it comes to entrepreneurship. Now, you want to have collaboration and build relationships, but at the end of the day, it's on you. So if you want to stay in recovery, you have to take 100% responsibility for your life in recovery. Well, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to take 100% responsibility for your business and the people you serve. So there's a big correlation of traits of the entrepreneur in recovery. And that means that people who are not entrepreneurs, but they're in recovery, in many ways, they're very entrepreneurial. So I've seen this correlation time and time again when I meet people and they start telling me what they want to do or what their purpose is. I'm like, dude, that you have to start a business that does that. And they're, no, I don't want to do it. But it's like, well, but so I find this a lot. That there's this rebellious attitude of like, yeah, I work for this person, but it's like, I'm grateful, but I want to do this. I want to do that. And I'm like, yes. So do it on the side, be an entrepreneur and do it on the side. So there's these and then talking about the addictions of entrepreneurs in recovery or entrepreneurs. Yeah. Workaholism, food addiction, sex addiction, gambling addiction. My friend Michael Dash, he wrote a book about gambling addiction called Chasing the High. It's a great book. And so, he's an entrepreneur in recovery. And so like we fall into all these addictions because we're just like going, burning at that. We're just tearing through things, trying to gain that success. So we renege our self-care, and then we start to get into these habits that turn into addictions. And so there's definitely, and I definitely don't just work with entrepreneurs. I work with tons of leaders in the nonprofit space that are entrepreneurial, but they're looking for, how do I facilitate with my people? How do I actually bring facilitation to them? So I work with them. And entrepreneurs in recovery one day will probably be have a lot of entrepreneurs in recovery in it. In fact, my closest friends are all entrepreneurs in recovery, which none of us were 5 years ago. So it just became this idea that grew into something real. And one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, says, as an entrepreneur, make it up, make it real, and make it reoccur. So that's all I've done is I just made it up. I made it real, and now I'm living it, and it's working. And it took a lot of, there's a lot of obstacles, but at the same time, I really believe, just from my experience, that people in recovery, and I'm talking mental health recovery and addiction, they're entrepreneurial in many ways. When they start to like go at it, they're like, yeah, I want to create that journal, create that jewelry, create that art. I'm like, oh, cool. You know, that's, and they want to get paid for it, you know? So I'm like, good for you. And so that's what I found in my journey.